Hi, I'm Tessa, I'm a watercolour artist, and one of my favourite things to paint is eyes. So in this video, I'm going to break down how I draw an eye, and in a couple of future videos, we'll look at how I paint them in different styles. As always, if you enjoy this video, please do check out my socials down below, as well as my Patreon, where you can get early access to this kind of stuff if you aren't already subscribed. This is going to be super basic, so all you're going to need for it is some sketching paper and pencils, maybe an eraser too. I'm going to start with this mechanical pencil, but just use whatever you have to hand, it doesn't really matter. Now the first step is to draw a circle. So I'm drawing a circle right in the centre of the page, and that is going to be our eyeball. Now obviously this drawing is 2D and an eye is 3D, so this is actually representing a sphere, and it's really important throughout this tutorial to remember that, so that you're not sort of trying to draw everything flat. There's a lot of depth involved here, and it's just useful to remember that. Next up, I'm going to draw the iris. And for the sake of learning to draw an eye, I'm going to have the eye looking straight ahead, so it's just going to be right in the centre of the eyeball. And like I mentioned, an eyeball is a sphere, it's not flat. So it can be really helpful, especially when drawing at other angles, to add planes into the eye. So if you're looking straight at it, it would just be a cross. But these lines do technically go all the way around the front and the back of the sphere. So now we have the basis for our eyeball, I'm going to start thinking about adding the eyelids, starting with the inner and outer corner, and this is where we start thinking about the structure of the rest of the face. For the inner corner, I'm just going to mark a point just outside of the sphere, sort of level with the bottom section of the iris, and for the outer corner, we're going to look much closer to the edge of the eyeball, but slightly up, although both of these points are going to vary a lot person to person, and making sure you get the right eye shape really defines the face and how recognisable it will be. Once we've got these points, we're then just going to connect them up, but it's not always just a simple curve, as we need to reflect the curve of both the eyeball and the eye socket. Knowing my eyes, the top lid is pretty much this uniform curved shape, but the bottom lid, at the inner corner around the tear duct, you'll actually have a small upward or inward technically curve, where the eyelid goes in to meet the eyeball, and then the bottom lid curves around the shape of the eyeball from there. So this is one of the parts where remembering that we're working with a sphere is really important. And then I can go in and add small adjustments to account for the contouring in both of those lids, and the way the inner corner pulls up towards the nose bridge and stuff like that. Finally, I'm going to add the caruncle, which is that fleshy bit by the inner corner, and then we can move onto the eyelid crease. And now this is something that I'm conscious I always draw the same, because I draw a lot of self-portraits, but it does really define the eye and the face overall. And again, it's following the curve of the eyeball, which you will definitely get tired of me saying by the end of this tutorial, but for some people it can be quite angular and creased, others, like me, have quite a rounded eyelid, or you might have a monolid or hooded eyes, and it will make a massive difference to recognisability, so do make sure you pay attention to your reference and get it right. Next up, I'm thinking about the brow bone and the eyebrow, which doesn't completely follow the shape of the eyeball, but is usually a slightly more squared off version that sits just above it. And I'll say it again, everyone's eyebrows are so different. One of mine has this quite defined arch that I'm drawing here, and it's also going to change a lot as the expression changes. Often the only thing I'm changing in a painting to try and convey sadness or anger is the eyebrows, so it's a really powerful thing, and again, important that you get it right. Now I'm moving on to the bottom of the eye, and again I'm following the curve of the eyeball, but this isn't necessarily going to be a very harsh line. It's actually often quite soft, but really reflects a couple of other features on the face. For example, the inner corner of the eye is often brought forwards by the nose, so that corner might look a little bit more taut, whereas the outer corner might be compressed by the cheekbone pushing up onto it. And essentially this is the basis of your drawing for an eye. Now obviously there is a lot more we can do with this, and a lot more we can add, so let's go in and refine a couple of the details. In this little sped up section, I am just adding in the general shape of the surrounding features, and some of the dips and bumps around the eye. So the nose, the cheekbones, the edge of the brow, and so forth. And this really gives us the context and the surroundings that add depth to our drawing. Now, one thing you might have noticed is that I haven't added a pupil. Now, personally, with how I paint, I often don't want a defined edge of the pupil, and you'll see that when I upload my painting tutorials for this. But for the sake of this drawing, I'm going to add it in here, and it's basically a slightly smaller circle within the iris. And now it's just a case of defining some of those lines a little bit more, and adding a couple more details. This includes the depth of the bottom eyelid. Because our skin isn't a single layer, it's actually quite thick, So when you're looking at either the bottom or the top lid from the right angle, you will see the depth of it, or at least the shadow it casts. And finally, eyelashes. Now, women tend to have thinner and shorter eyelashes, whereas men tend to have fuller lashes. But whatever they're like, make sure you're not drawing them as lines just going straight up or straight down. First of all, they curve and taper, but they also tend to cluster a few at a time or cross over. And on the top lid especially, you're going to see them actually fall down across the eyeball, since they're actually coming towards you, sort of out of the plane of the paper. Sometimes it's not really necessary to define them like this though, and often a more muted smudge to represent them can work really well. What I'm doing now is just defining some of the harsher lines, which will help when it comes to painting or shading to work out where I want to add the most contrast. And I just find this really useful, and also if I don't ever plan on doing the shading, it just makes the whole thing look a little bit nicer and tidier and cleaner. And here it is, the completed outline, where you can still see the sphere that we started with and how the structure has broken down around it. And obviously this is a bit generic because every eye is different, every angle is different, every expression is different. But knowing the basic structure really does get you a long way and is such an important foundation for anyone who wants to do portraiture or anything like that. Now what I'm doing is adding some shading, and it's going to be a very quick and rough pass, so I will leave the voiceover for this bit. But in essence with the shading, I'm thinking about what is further back and therefore more heavily shaded, and what is more prominent and further forwards, so lighter. And of course you also want to think about the angle of your light, but lighting is a whole other video that I could do, and I will probably talk a lot more about when I actually come to painting it. So for now, this is just a quick look at where I would focus my shadows. And that's it. This is a quick example of where you might place your shadows around an eye, but remember it's going to depend a lot on the face structure, lighting, angle, and all those different things, so make sure to check your reference. So while this has been a whistle-stop tour, I wanted to show quickly how I would apply this to different eyes or different angles. I'm applying the same principles, the same structure, but modifying it according to where the skin would be pulling taut relative to the direction the eye is looking. But yet again, the eyelids, the crease of the eyeball, everything follows that sphere of the eyeball, and we can still trace that original circle underneath. So even when we're drawing maybe a more interesting composition, we're constantly referring back to that basic structure and understanding, and that will really help us to make things more consistent and more realistic, regardless of what sort of eye we're drawing or who it belongs to. And finally, that is it, the basics of how I draw an eye ready for painting. Obviously, there are so many variables, be that the individual eye you're drawing, or the different eyelid types, or the lighting and the expression. But having the foundations down is the best place to start so that you can understand what all those little micro adjustments that you might need are. And hopefully, then you'll be able to progress your portraits with some super emotive eyes. I will be doing a follow-up video or two where I'll show you how I would paint this in 2 different styles, but I will leave you with some of my favourite eyes that I've ever painted, and hopefully I will see you again in the future. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, do let me know down in the comments or drop me a message. I would absolutely love to hear your feedback, and yeah, see you again soon.